Welcome back to the Rescue Mission Podcast by City Vision University, where we bridge tradition and innovation. To help build that bridge, Season 1 of our podcast is focused on the history and values of rescue missions, while Season 2 is focused primarily on innovations and best practices relevant to rescue missions. You can find the show notes for this episode and subscribe to our newsletter at rescuemissions.cityvision.edu.
Okay, let's dive in. We've got some really interesting material here you shared with us from a document called morethanhomelessshelter.pdf. It seems like a really insightful look at what effective recovery programming actually looks like, particularly for rescue missions.
That's right. And it goes way beyond just, putting a roof over someone's head. It's a deep exploration of how you actually support people towards lasting change and wellness.
So the goal here is to pull out the key insights from this source material, figure out what really makes for comprehensive care.
Exactly. What goes beyond just the basics.
And it kicks off by kind of challenging how we often view homelessness itself, doesn't it? The source argues pretty strongly that homelessness, well, it isn't really the main problem.
Right. It frames it more as a symptom. The document suggests the deeper issues are things like addictions, maybe relational disaffiliation, that breakdown of healthy connections.
Okay.
And also things like character, attitude, even self-awareness. Those are seen as the root causes that are driving the instability.
So just providing shelter, I mean, obviously that's critical right then and there, but it doesn't really get to those deeper layers.
That's the argument. Providing only shelter meets that immediate vital survival need, sure. But the source suggests it might not actually help resolve the underlying stuff.
Right.
And it even hints it could potentially set someone back, in a way, from doing the harder work needed for real healing and stability.
Which is why intentional programming becomes so crucial if the aim is genuine, lasting change.
Precisely. The document makes a really strong case that you need structured, purposeful programming. Stuff designed specifically to tackle those foundational problems if you want to see real improvements in someone's wellness and, long-term success.
And that leads right into the argument for long-term programming. What kind of time frame are we talking about here, and why is that length so important?
Well, the material defines long-term pretty broadly, anywhere from 90 days up to 5 years.
Right.
But it seems like within rescue missions, the focus is often on getting someone to at least 12 months of sobriety within that program structure.
And that 12-month mark isn't just pulled out of thin air, is it? There's data behind that.
There is, yeah. The source points to research, I think it mentioned Dennis Foss and Scott from 2007. It showed relapse rates drop pretty significantly, like below 50% after a year of someone being abstinent.
Wow, below half.
Yeah. And they keep dropping, getting down to less than 15% after 5 years. So that first year, it's clearly a really critical threshold.
That's a powerful statistic. Is there anything else that makes that longer duration necessary?
Post-acute withdrawal syndrome, PAWS, gets mentioned. The source notes that those symptoms, they can hang around for over a year, sometimes even 2.
Right.
So staying in a supportive place while you're navigating that is pretty vital.
And just practically speaking, from the experience noted in the source, when does the real internal change start to happen?
Yeah, the insight shared there is that significant, noticeable internal change on those root issues we were talking about, character, attitude, self-awareness, that usually starts kicking in around the 6-month mark.
Okay, 6 months.
So programs shorter than that often seem to have less lasting effects because that deep work, it just hasn't had enough time to really take hold and solidify.
It really hammers home that change takes time. And there's a specific recommendation about structure too, isn't there? About keeping long-term clients separate from folks in emergency shelter?
Yes, it strongly advises separating clients who are in those long-term programs from people just using short-term emergency shelter.
Okay.
Now, the emergency shelter can be a great entry point, to identify people who might be ready for that longer journey. But mixing the populations day to day, the source argues, can actually be counterproductive.
Why is that separation considered so important?
Well, the source really emphasizes the power of relationships and the influence of the peer culture. Clients who maybe aren't ready or perhaps aren't willing to engage in that deep change yet, they can unfortunately negatively impact the morale and the progress of those who are trying. So separating the groups helps protect that intentional culture of healing and accountability that they're trying to build in a long-term program. It reduces the risk of relapse being influenced by peers who might still be in active addiction or just survival mode.
Protecting that fragile environment for growth makes total sense. Okay, now let's talk about the scope of this programming. The document really stresses it's not just about addiction or, finding a job. It's about the whole person.
Absolutely. The vision is definitely holistic, addressing all sides of an individual. It uses Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a kind of framework.
Right, the pyramid.
Yeah, pointing out that, okay, yes, immediate physiological needs, food, shelter, and safety needs have to be met first. That's the basic shelter function.
Foundation.
Exactly. But to move beyond just surviving, to actually thriving and building a sustainable life, you've got to address those higher levels of the hierarchy.
So how does this get structure in the actual programming?
Well, the document presents something like the 8 dimensions of wellness, or a similar kind of comprehensive model, as the organizing structure. The goal is to bring balance across all these different dimensions,
Okay.
which in turn helps clients experience greater internal peace and develop better ways to take care of themselves.
Let's unpack a few of these dimensions. Financial wellness seems incredibly practical, obviously.
Oh, it is. And it's vital for long-term stability. But it goes beyond just earning money. It's about really understanding budgeting, how to manage debt, planning for the future, and building that sense of self-efficacy, that belief you can handle your finances. The source even mentions popular resources like Suze Warman or Dave Ramsey as examples of the kind of material that can empower clients here.
Because for many clients, maybe financial literacy just wasn't something they were ever taught or maybe never had the chance to practice.
Exactly. So providing this knowledge can give a huge boost to a client's sense of control and hope about their financial future. It counters that feeling of hopelessness that often comes with chronic money problems.
Right. The document also makes an interesting point, that observing how a client handles money can sometimes reveal insights into their underlying thought patterns or maybe even hidden issues.
Interesting. Okay, what about intellectual wellness? That sounds kind of academic, but the source seems to describe it much more broadly.
Yeah, it's definitely way more expansive than just, say, GED prep. In this context, intellectual wellness is about developing things like critical thinking, problem-solving skills,
Okay.
computer skills, strong communication, both talking and writing professionalism, ethical reasoning, and being self-directed.
And the document backs this up with some research about what employers are actually looking for.
It does. It cites the Partnership for 21st Century Skills, highlighting that employers often report seeing big gaps in these areas, things like professionalism, communication, critical thinking, even in people coming out of school. So focusing programming here directly tackles what makes someone a valuable, reliable employee, sometimes even more than just specific job skills. That's a really powerful insight. It's not just what you can do, but how you show up to do it.
Precisely. Developing that core capacity is crucial. Next is life skills.
That dimension sounds like it covers a lot of territory.
It does, and it's really fundamental internal work. This includes things like cultivating positive character traits, increasing how satisfied someone feels with their life overall, consistently making healthy and safe choices,
Right.
building and nurturing support networks, engaging in healthy social stuff and recreation, and practicing good self-care. It's really about equipping clients with the tools and habits for a stable, healthy life outside the program.
Physical wellness seems a bit more straightforward.
Yeah, that one focuses more on basic health habits.
Yeah.
Understanding nutrition, maybe using models like the healthy eating plate and getting regular physical exercise. Simple but totally essential for overall well-being.
Social wellness feels especially relevant, given what you said earlier about relational disaffiliation being a root cause.
Oh, it's absolutely foundational. Social wellness covers interpersonal skills, understanding different social styles. The source actually mentions a model: analytical, expressive, driver, amiable.
Okay.
Looking at things like task versus relationship focus, pace, directness. It also covers conflict resolution, developing healthy friendships and support networks, and even working towards relational reconciliation where that's possible and healthy.
Learning how to navigate relationships effectively seems critical.
And learning to tell the difference between healthy and unhealthy connections is huge. Many clients just haven't had positive relationship blueprints to follow.
Yeah.
The document really hammers this home. Healthy, supportive relationships are second only to a spiritual encounter in their faith-based context, anyway, as a predictor of success. Helping clients build and actually practice using healthy networks, while also protecting themselves from negative influences, that's vital work. It even suggests the platinum rule, treating others how they want to be treated, might be more effective than the golden rule because it respects those different social styles.
Then there's spiritual wellness, specifically within that faith-based setting.
Right. So this dimension focuses on providing the opportunity for clients to encounter God and grow in spiritual maturity. This might involve moving beyond just changing behaviors towards discovering and using personal gifts, cultivating things like the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, engaging in prayer, study, seeking spiritual guidance. But the source is clear. While the mission is faith-based, they don't require clients to adopt a specific faith. The aim is more to create an environment where these encounters can happen and encourage a willingness to contribute positively to that environment for everyone.
It's about creating the space and the opportunity.
And modeling it through staff actions being doers of the word, as they put it. The focus is on progress and growth in faith, not demanding immediate perfection.
Okay, finally, vocational wellness. This also sounds like it's about more than just, getting a job description filled.
Much more. It's about understanding work ethic, which the document argues is really centered heavily on character and attitude traits that employers value. These like a positive attitude, integrity, dependability, interpersonal skills, initiative, enthusiasm, teamwork, flexibility, critical thinking.
Right.
The source even cites a survey highlighting just how highly employers rate these soft skills.
So the programming should focus on developing these traits maybe just as much as, or even more than, specific job skills.
Absolutely. While things like resume building and interview tips are useful, developing that underlying character that makes someone a reliable, valued employee, that's seen as more impactful for long-term success. The document also touches on helping clients understand the value exchange in the employer-employee relationship, maybe pushing back a bit against potential feelings of entitlement.
And there's a significant point made about the timing, about when someone should actually enter the job market.
Yes. The source notes that individuals struggling with addiction often have really short job histories, like less than a year, which creates this cycle of negative references.
Oof, yeah.
So it suggests that rushing clients into the job market too soon, maybe before they've really solidified their recovery or navigated challenges like hitting that wall phase, can actually be detrimental. Focusing on developing the other wellness dimensions might be more beneficial at first, maybe waiting up to a year before pushing the job search hard.
What about the concept of work therapy that's mentioned?
Yeah. Work therapy is presented as a way to provide purposeful healing work within the program itself. The key is that clients are intentionally seen as students, learning and practicing skills in a safe, kind of simulated environment, rather than just being used as free labor for the ministry's operations. It's a place to learn work ethic, build character, get coaching, and, make mistakes without getting immediately fired.
That distinction feels really crucial, prioritizing the client's development over the ministry's immediate labor needs.
It is. And staff training is essential there to keep that focus. The source also cautions against assigning work therapy tasks that might just reinforce a client's old identity or keep them stuck in their comfort zone, potentially stopping them from working on those deeper root issues.
Right.
Their value in the program shouldn't be tied just to how well they perform in work therapy.
Let's shift gears a bit, because all this structured programming is happening while the client is on this internal journey, often grappling with addiction, their thought patterns, and the risk of relapse. The source has quite a bit to say about this.
It does. It reaffirms that addiction is often a symptom, but also highlights how important it is for the ministry leadership to be aligned on how they understand addiction. Do they see it primarily as moral, medical, spiritual, psychological, cultural, or some mix? Consistency in that approach is vital for both staff and clients.
And it really emphasizes that there's often a distinct way of thinking associated with addiction.
Yes, the concept of stinking thinking comes up a lot. These are those negative, counterproductive thought patterns that the source, drawing from folks like Dr. David Burns, identifies as major barriers to change.
Like what kind of specific patterns are we talking about?
Well, the document lists several. Obsession with the negative, discounting anything positive, jumping to conclusions without much evidence, magnification or catastrophizing, making mountains out of molehills. Emotional reasoning, which is believing something's true just because you feel it strongly. Those shoulda, coulda, wouldas that lead to guilt, labeling yourself negatively based on mistakes, and personalization and blame, making everything about you or blaming others.
Wow, those thought patterns can really warp someone's perception of reality.
Oh, absolutely. They can create a total self-fulfilling prophecy. There's this great car honking illustration in the source that captures it perfectly. Yeah, the same exact event, someone honking at you, leads to completely different internal feelings and external actions based entirely on the person's thought process and the attitude that follows. It's like Olga Rosmanith is quoted saying, "Your internal weather, that is something you can learn to control. It's about changing your thoughts to change your experience."
And resisting things like complaining or always needing to be right, referencing Luminita Saviak's work there too.
Yes, those are framed as habits to consciously give up if you want to increase your personal happiness and life satisfaction. It's all part of that internal shift in attitude and thinking.
So with all this focus on thinking and internal work, is relapse just inevitable? The document seems to suggest maybe not, although it's clearly a huge challenge.
Right. The source makes a distinction between just abstinence, simply not using sobriety, which is more of an intentional decision to stay abstinent, and then recovery, which is described as a deeper renewal of the mind, actually thinking differently. And yeah, there's that debate mentioned. Is someone ever fully recovered? Or are they always recovering? While relapse rates are definitely high, especially early on, the document argues that relapse can be prevented.
And it puts the main responsibility for that on the individual.
It does stress that avoiding relapse ultimately comes down to the individual using healthy coping skills and engaging their support network, though it fully acknowledges that the network has a massive influence.
Right.
It pushes back a bit against the idea of slips being just a normal, expected part of the process. It quotes a counselor saying that framing it that way can unintentionally give permission for relapse. While slips definitely happen often, the document emphasizes personal agency. It doesn't have to happen.
Are there identifiable stages in recovery mentioned?
Yeah.
And warning signs people should look out for?
Yes. 3 stages are outlined. First, learning a new normal, which takes maybe up to 6 months. Then, a often difficult grieving process where suppressed emotions start coming up. That's often the second 6 months. And then a final stage focused on deep connection with those healthy support networks. It specifically highlights that hitting a wall phase, usually around 10 to 18 months in, where things like stagnation, hopelessness, or apathy can crop up and really need proactive planning to get through. Dangerous anniversaries related to past drug use are also mentioned as potential pitfalls.
And the warning signs that might signal a potential relapse.
There's a pretty comprehensive list. Exhaustion, dishonesty, even small lies, mood swings, anger outbursts, isolating oneself, rigid black and white thinking, self-pity, procrastination, making big deals out of small things while minimizing big ones.
Wow.
Lack of gratitude, constant complaining, and interestingly, an increase in other addictive behaviors like excessive caffeine or sugar.
Yeah.
The Faster Awareness Scale is mentioned as a tool for recognizing these.
Okay.
And crucially, the source notes that loved ones, friends, family, staff often spot these new or re-emerging patterns, these warning signs, before the person themselves does.
It just highlights how layered and, frankly, how vigilant the whole process of recovery needs to be.
It really does. And the source also includes an interesting point connecting quitting smoking or nicotine use to greater success in staying abstinent from other substances, suggesting that leaving that nicotine piece unaddressed might kind of leave a pathway open.
We've touched on relationships quite a few times, and the document really elevates their importance. It calls them a foundation for recovery, second only perhaps to a spiritual encounter in a faith context.
Yes, the power of relationships is definitely a central thread running through the whole thing. Relational disaffiliation, remember, was identified as a core reason for homelessness.
Right.
And it creates this difficult self-perpetuating cycle. So helping clients identify, build, and actually practice using healthy support networks that could be family if it's healthy, good friends, church communities, peers in recovery, supportive coworkers, formal support groups, that's paramount. Because many might genuinely not know the difference between a healthy connection and an unhealthy one.
And this focus on relationships directly impacts the kind of culture the mission itself needs to foster.
Absolutely. The source describes the ideal culture as being an intentional, faith-based, healthy, healing community. And that culture isn't accidental. It has to be built deliberately through training, commitment from staff, clients, volunteers. What's allowed to happen consistently becomes the norm, whether it's good or bad.
How do rules fit into creating a healing culture? Sometimes rules can feel pretty rigid or punitive.
That's a fair point. Rules are seen as necessary, and they play a vital role. The document argues they provide stability and safety, addressing those fundamental needs on Maslow's hierarchy after immediate survival is handled. They create a predictable environment where clients can hopefully feel secure enough to let their guard down and engage in the deeper transformative work.
But the way rules are implemented seems absolutely critical.
Entirely. Rules need to be explained. The why behind them needs to be communicated clearly and repeatedly because, as the source puts it, rules without reason cause resentment and rebellion.
Makes sense.
They should also be fair, flexible, where appropriate, and this is crucial. The implementation should always prioritize the relationship between the staff member and the client. The source advises against a sort of drill sergeant approach, or just relying on impersonal signs like staff only. Staff should aim to explain the reasons in a way that builds client buy-in and commitment, not just, grudging compliance.
And the relationship between staff and client is singled out as being exceptionally important.
It's presented as potentially the single most vital factor in a client's success, even more impactful potentially than the staff member's professional training or years of experience.
Wow.
Which is why the document suggests missions should really prioritize investing in skilled, well-compensated staff for these direct care roles, because the weakest link in those staff relationships can significantly limit how effective the whole ministry is.
Building community within the program itself, like having shared meals or activities, that seems to support this relationship focus.
Yeah, that mirrors healthy family dynamics, and it strengthens those peer support networks. It provides that crucial, tangible relational support system right there within the program environment. The document also briefly touches on different counseling or program styles used to support all these changes we're talking about.
Like CBT and motivational interviewing, I think I saw those mentioned.
Yes. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is mentioned as a method for helping people identify and challenge those negative thought patterns and behaviors, aiming to change the undesirable consequences.
Okay.
And motivational interviewing, MI, is presented as a more collaborative, less confrontational style. It's focused on helping clients find their own internal reasons for change. It uses techniques like open questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries, often remembered by the acronym ORRS.
And the research cited seems to lean towards those more supportive approaches being more effective.
Yeah, the source mentions studies, like one by Miller, Benefield, and Tonigan from back in '93, which indicated that confrontational therapy styles could actually increase client resistance and lead to poorer outcomes.
Interesting.
Compared to more supportive, empathetic approaches, which resulted in better abstinence rates and reduced substance use. So while blending different theories is probably beneficial, the document keeps coming back to the idea that the overall therapeutic alliance, the quality of the relationships, those remain the most powerful factors.
This brings us to a really significant section in the document: ethical responsibilities and maintaining healthy boundaries.
Yeah, this is critical, absolutely critical for the safety of clients, the safety of staff, and just the integrity of the entire program. The source strongly emphasizes non-maleficence, basically, do no harm, and practicing compassion. Having written policies and providing regular training on ethics is highlighted as a best practice. It reduces risks, even for organizations that might not be legally required to follow specific clinical standards.
And there are specific danger signs listed for when staff-client boundaries might be getting blurred.
Yeah, a pretty comprehensive list is provided. Things like frequently thinking about a specific client outside of work, spending social time with them, oversharing your own personal information, feeling excessively worried about or defensive of one particular client.
Okay.
Advocating for one client over others when it comes to policy, feeling personally hurt by a client's choices, any inappropriate physical touch or flirtation, believing you're the only one who truly understands or can help a client.
Right, that savior complex idea.
Exactly, or a client showing inappropriate preference for you, accepting secrets from a client that you wouldn't normally keep, or maybe just failing to document interactions properly. These are all red flags.
And the principle of once a client, always a client seems important for maintaining those professional lines long term.
Yeah, it emphasizes that ongoing need for vigilance in maintaining professional boundaries, even well after someone has formally left the program.
The document also offers some practical filters for making ethical decisions when things aren't clear-cut.
It does. It provides a kind of 6-point checklist to evaluate any action or decision. First, is it legal? Second, is it beneficial and healthy for the ministry overall? Third, is it beneficial and healthy for the staff member involved?
Okay.
Fourth, is it beneficial and healthy for the specific client involved? Fifth, is it beneficial and healthy for other clients? And sixth, is it consistent with the organization's policies? Using these filters can help navigate those tricky gray areas.
Staff self-disclosure and, sharing personal information, that's also discussed.
Yes, and it prompts staff to really think about the purpose of sharing. Why am I considering sharing this? What's the positive outcome I'm hoping for? How does this actually benefit the client?
Right.
It weighs potential pros like, Maybe building trust or validating the client's feelings against the cons, like potentially undermining the staff's authority, complicating the professional relationship, shifting the focus away from the client, or maybe even placing an undue burden on the client.
Concepts like transference and countertransference seem relevant here too.
Definitely. These describe situations where feelings or dynamics from past relationships get projected onto the current one. Transference is when the client projects feelings onto the staff member, maybe seeing them like a parent or a friend.
Okay.
Countertransference is when the staff member projects their feelings onto the client, maybe feeling overly protective or unusually annoyed or even attracted.
And the recommendation when those sorts of feelings crop up
Is to recognize them, first off, and then consider referring the client to another staff member if those feelings are interfering with objectivity. The goal is to maintain a neutral, professional, helpful relationship characterized by unconditional positive regard.
Privacy is another huge ethical consideration.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Protecting sensitive client information is just a fundamental duty. The source emphasizes being cautious in all communication, speaking discreetly, documenting meticulously, being careful about online presence. Referencing HIPAA standards is presented as a best practice for managing client data, even if an organization isn't technically covered by HIPAA law.
So practical steps like avoiding using names or pictures online without explicit permission, being mindful of conversations in public spaces, or not connecting with clients on personal social media accounts.
Exactly. And even simple things like how you might greet a former client if you bump into them out in public, maybe being intentionally vague to respect their privacy if they're with people who don't know their connection to the mission.
Yeah.
Physical touch is also addressed as needing extreme caution, generally limiting it to professional handshakes, maybe brief client-initiated same-gender hugs for comfort, but always being highly aware of potential trauma histories and respecting personal boundaries.
The document lists quite a few ethical discussion starters, which really highlights just how many nuanced situations can pop up in this kind of work.
Oh yeah, things like staff acting as accountability partners for clients, how to handle social media friend requests, dealing with your own friends or family seeking services, whether to accept gifts, making disciplinary calls based on what one client says about another, or even staff behavior that contradicts program rules. These all require clear policies, good training, and sometimes that case-by-case ethical filtering.
Okay, let's move towards the end of the document's insights. It touches on the importance of creating hope and providing purpose.
Yes, this is a powerful section. The document describes rescue mission staff almost as hope architects or hope creators. Hope is identified as just a crucial determining factor in recovery success. And staff have a real responsibility to actively foster it through their relationships and the whole environment they create.
The Kurt Richter swimming rat experiment is used here as a pretty stark analogy.
It is, yeah. A bit grim, but powerful. Richter found that rats who would normally drown fairly quickly in water they couldn't escape would swim for vastly longer, like over 24 hours, if they were just periodically lifted out for a brief rest.
Wow.
That tiny intervention apparently instilled the hope that rescue was possible, and it triggered this incredible increase in their instinct to fight for survival. The analogy, of course, is that people who are broken and feel hopeless need some reason, some spark of hope to keep fighting, not to give up.
And helplessness itself is linked to negative physical health outcomes.
Yeah. Studies cited in the document connect deep hopelessness and despondency to increased health risks, things like stroke, cardiac arrest after a bad diagnosis, even death following the loss of a spouse or child. The document points out that dwelling on things you can't control is a major hope stealer.
So helping clients shift their focus on to what they can actually influence is vital for building hope.
Absolutely. And connecting that directly to purpose. The source references research, I think, by Diener and colleagues, suggesting that focusing on eudaimonic values, living a life of purpose and meaning, is actually a better predictor of overall life satisfaction than just chasing happiness or pleasure alone.
So helping clients discover or maybe reconnect with their unique purpose in life seems like a really profound part of the whole treatment plan then.
It's presented that way, yeah. As a fundamental component of holistic recovery, helping individuals understand they were created with inherent value and for a purpose. This contributes significantly to their sense of meaning, their overall life satisfaction, which in turn reinforces their recovery journey. Developing things like personal mission statements, vision statements, value statements can be part of this process.
Okay, finally, let's just briefly revisit treatment planning and measuring success, maybe tying it back to some of the planning ideas mentioned earlier.
Right. So treatment plans, the document emphasizes, should be highly individualized. They need to be built on the client's strengths, developed collaboratively, and really driven by the client themselves. Research apparently supports this approach, leading to better outcomes.
Makes sense.
Providing clients with autonomy is key here. It lets them practice decision-making and new skills in a supported environment, and it reveals their thought processes so staff can coach them effectively.
And planning ahead for those potential bumps in the road.
Yeah, continuity of care includes proactively anticipating phases like that hitting a wall period, around 10, 18 months, and having strategies ready to support the client through it. The aim is to prevent what might otherwise be a surprising late-stage relapse.
And measuring success, then, is done across all those wellness dimensions we talked about earlier.
Correct. The outcomes are expected across all those areas: academic, addiction, financial, life skills, mental health, nutrition, fitness, spiritual, vocational. Success is measured by seeing goal achievement and growth across these different dimensions. The source also includes some interesting insights on strategic planning for the ministry itself, which obviously supports all this programming.
Kind of dreaming big, but starting small. Is that the idea?
Exactly that. Having a long-term vision, maybe looking 20 years down the road and then scaling that back to figure out what's actually achievable with current resources. The recommendation is to design programs and even job descriptions in a kind of modular way that's consistent with that future vision. That way, when the mission grows, the structure is already kind of in place, which reduces friction and ensures growth is intentional, not just reactive.
Wow. Okay, this document really does provide a comprehensive blueprint for moving beyond just basic shelter to genuinely transformative recovery.
It really pulls it all together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The idea that effective programming tackles those deep-root issues using a holistic approach, and it's anchored in long-term engagement, an intentional culture, strong relationships, ethical practice, and actively instilling both hope and purpose.
So, thinking about the bigger picture, what does all this mean for how maybe we should think about supporting people experiencing homelessness? It sounds like it means seeing them not just in terms of their immediate needs, but as complex individuals with layers, with immense potential, who need a supportive, intentional community to really heal and thrive.
Yeah, it shifts the focus, doesn't it? From just managing a problem to really investing in a person's potential for a renewed, purposeful life.
That definitely leaves us with something to think about. Given the depth of internal change needed, the importance of external support, and those documented challenges like hitting a wall even years into sobriety, is recovery ever truly a finished state? Or is it perhaps always an ongoing, lifelong process of growth, vigilance, and connection?
We hope you enjoy this episode and that it both inspires and equips you to serve the least, the last, and the lost in Jesus' name. You can find the show notes for this episode and subscribe to our newsletter at rescuemissions.cityvision.edu. If you would like to learn more about City Vision University's courses and degree programs, visit our website at www.cityvision.edu.